it's time to talk about the great big elephant in the living room. I don't like Osama bin Laden or Islamic fundamentalism, particularly how women are treated either. And I want to be safe from terrorism and violence too, but I get equally frightened, even terrorized, when President Bush says things like, "You are either with us or with the terrorists." Don't be intimidated by that. Now, of all times, is a time to stand up and show some spine and say, yo, we are not with Bush or the terrorists. And join the growing number of people who are starting to ask the important questions like, is what we are doing over there right now the best way to solve this problem? And will this short-term orgy of violence in fact bring much bigger problems down the road? I fear a mass slaughter of innocent civilians far greater than what's already gone down at the World Trade Center, which of course has a way of planting seeds and creating more terrorists. Or maybe that's what our government wants, so we can make arms manufacturers rich till kingdom come and continue this state of emergency for as long as the Ashcrofts want it to stay here. The military tribunals that Bush and Ashcroft want to have for people, even legal immigrants in this country, and probably extended to other people born here, suspected of being terrorists just because somebody like Bush or Rumsfeld says they are terrorists. And even if we do succeed in wiping out Osama bin Laden and all of his followers, what will their kids be like? What will their kids be like? Look no further than how young those kids are throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers in Palestine. There's your answer. The frightening thing is that Osama bin Laden does speak for millions and millions of other people. Unfortunately, he's right when he says, kill me, 100 more will take my place. I fear it'll be more like 100,000 more. In 1991, Jimmy Carter warned the last George Bush that his Gulf War would set peace and Middle Eastern relations back at least 20 years. Now look what's happened. Now what do we do? Right now, it seems like we have a clown prince of the oil companies in the White House surrounded by overturned cans of gasoline being handed matches. I don't think we should forget that this is the same president who, before he was in the White House, thought the Taliban was a rock band. And at the Republican convention came right out and said, don't mess with Texas. And things like, I will have a foreign-handed foreign policy. Or after the protester was shot to death in the face by the police, then run over by a police truck in Geneva, Italy, on the grounds that he was a terrorist, I might add, he said, well, I know what I believe, and I believe what I believe is right. A lot of people, even Al Gore and Joseph Lieberman, gee, what a surprise, are saying, well, we have to line up and support our president now. But I just don't have any confidence in Bush to show any wisdom or do the right thing in this situation. I can't shake this vision of the guy at the War Council meetings pulling up his T-shirt over his head like Beavis and running around the table saying, I am the great Cornholio! I am the great Cornholio! And then Sheena Powell grabbing him by the shirt collar and plopping him down in his chair. Now sit still, George. We have a war to plan. We have people to kill. We have countries to annihilate. Then can we watch some baseball? Even his father, in a rare moment of candor on September 11th or the next day on TV, gave his own son a no-confidence vote when he was asked, well, is your son ready for the task ahead? And he smiled that clenched teeth reptilian grin of his. Oh, I don't think anyone is prepared for something like this, but he has a great team around him. He has a great team around him. And it's the team that scares me the most. Donald Rumsfeld, no more need be said. Vice President Dick Cheney, who's really running the country in the war, when he was Secretary of Defense during the Gulf War, ordered then General Colin Powell to draw up plans to nuke Baghdad. Powell, earlier on, helped cover up the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War. Attorney General John Ashcroft is a Bible-thumping white supremacist who has prayer meetings in his office before every day of work. It is the team that worries me. For the most part, after September 11th, I have been overseas on tour and had the privilege of being exposed to much more in-depth and multi-sided media coverage of the war on terrorism than what we are being presented with here. I couldn't read the Dutch ones or the German ones because of the language barrier, but newspapers with websites in England like The Guardian out of Manchester and even The Independent had all kinds of things we're not getting over here, such as the long-time connection between CIA and various Mujahideen groups, some of whom became the Northern Alliance, and heroin running and all. Or, according to The Guardian, last July, there was a mid-level informal gathering of diplomats in a hotel room in Berlin. America there, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Northern Alliance, Taliban invited but didn't attend. Or the American diplomat was reported by The Guardian who've come right out and said, we're getting ready to go into Afghanistan and take out Osama bin Laden. They didn't care if the Pakistani representative took that back to the Taliban or not, which The Guardian reported he did. More importantly, there has been much more coverage over there of exactly the sort of overturned cans of gasoline and potential fires we are playing with over there. Think of Pakistan. The military dictator there has only been in power 2 years after a coup, and he must be frightened out of his wits. There's one gun in one side of his head saying, you are with us or with the terrorists. Don't mess with Texas. And on the other side are his own people, estimated to be 15% pro-Taliban. And we're not talking about Afghan Taliban. We're talking about the Taliban movement within Pakistan itself, which is also estimated to include 30% of the Pakistani armed forces, including some generals. Pervez Musharraf, the strongman, recently fired the longtime head of Pakistani intelligence, who, in my guess, probably has a lot of interesting friends. It wouldn't be that hard for some of those generals to knock off Musharraf just like they knocked off the last guy. Then what have we got? A new Islamic fundamentalist government of a country of 140 million people who has the atomic bomb. That is the kind of fire we are playing with over there. There are Islamic fundamentalist movements of the violent and intolerant kind brewing in all the other countries around there. They already got Iran, and then up above is these shaky former Soviet republics that just became independent countries and are still figuring out how to run themselves. Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all of them with Islamic fundamentalist movements. There's even one in the Chinese part bordering Afghanistan. And thanks to the training of all these warriors for the jihad during the uprising against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, not only did the CIA and Pakistan's ISI intelligence help recruit them, train them, Saudi Arabia and us funding them, but they then took their jihad back to their native countries. And so we've got this going on in at least 2 different parts of Indonesia, in the Philippines, stretching all the way across to Egypt and Algeria. That is the kind of fire we are playing with here. Meanwhile, Bush came right out and said, the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it. What? What about negotiating? What about listening? What about addressing the root causes of terrorism in the first place? Even listening to one of our own federal agencies who presented the new president with a report in January 2001 stating the following, that thanks to further economic globalization, quote, regions, countries, and groups feeling left behind will face deepening economic stagnation, political instability, and cultural alienation. They will foster political, ethnic, ideological, and religious extremism along with the violence that often accompanies it. This was the CIA talking. They don't even listen to them in the Bush administration, apparently. And with all these potential tinderboxes going off, the longer we blow people up indiscriminately there, the more these fires in other countries are going to grow. This is giving bin Laden exactly what he wants. A world war between Islam and the West, as well as a permanent state of emergency at home. 2001. An anthrax odyssey. What a great way to distract the public, keep them paranoid enough not to read what's in the anti-terrorism legislation going through, and not to question the fact that our nice, neat surgical strike against the Taliban and bin Laden is at present not going very far in the long run. But meanwhile, I never thought I'd see the day when all I had to do for entertainment was go into the grocery store and look at the bags of flour and baking soda and start laughing and thinking wicked thoughts. Now, of all times, we got to beware of false images in the media. It already has been questioned as whether or not the celebrating Palestinians on CNN the day of September 11th was actually old footage from 1991. Some people are saying it is, some people are saying it isn't, but it's seriously worth asking the question. After all, look what helped draw us into the Gulf War. The news reports that savage agents of Saddam Hussein were rampaging through Kuwait, dumping premature babies out of incubators and running off with hospital equipment while leaving innocent people to die. And then there was a young woman who testified before Congress about how horrible things were in her country because of the barbaric nature of Iraqi troops. Please help restore our democracy, ho ho, to Kuwait by bringing back the royal family who had nothing good to say about democracy. Well, it turned out that the story about the incubators was planted and the woman hired by the Hill and Knowlton Advertising Agency, employed by the Kuwaiti royal family to find ways to persuade the American people that it was in their best interest to go to war over there just to put them back on the throne. An even better example might be the Gulf of Tonkin incident. After that supposedly happened, and North Vietnamese, gunboats fired on one of our boats, all but a handful of members of Congress voted to give President Johnson a blank check to go crazy in Vietnam. 50,000 American people lost their lives, almost 1 million Vietnamese, and the Agent Orange birth defects are still going on over there. Yet now, it's widely acknowledged, even by our corporate media, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never occurred. We got to watch out for stuff like this. I hope it isn't true, but the paranoid side of me has to wonder if these envelopes of white powder that have got the military-grade anthrax in them are actually coming from American intelligence so we can pin that on Saddam Hussein and widen the war overseas. After all, the loosest cannons in the cowboy faction of the Bush administration, be it Vice President Cheney or Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, have openly been calling for widening the war not only into Iraq, but Syria and Libya as well. What's that going to lead to? Wolfowitz, according to the British media, even recruited the first CIA director under Clinton, who was James Woolsey, to go over there, theoretically, behind Donald Rumsfeld and President Bush's back, to go try and dig up dirt and link Saddam Hussein to the World Trade Center bombings so that they could get their wish and widen the war. That's cowboy stuff for you. And nobody is more cynical in manipulating our anguish and fear and rightly felt horror and indignation over the World Trade Center and Pentagon bombings in order to push their own dark agenda than the Bush administration. To me, that is downright unpatriotic when suddenly we have to put nuclear missiles in outer space and give Reagan his Star Wars program to fight terrorism. All the nukes in space and surveillance satellites in the world failed to stop the attacks on the World Trade Center. Why are they going to do any better now? I'm a lot more frightened of one of those nuclear space toys malfunctioning and crashing back to Earth like the Russian space station recently did, and in the process blowing up and scattering plutonium dust all over our atmosphere, risking annihilating every living thing on Earth from radiation poisoning. I'm far more afraid of that than Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and all their followers combined. And how irresponsible is it to say all of a sudden, even some of the Democrats in Congress saying, oh, well, even though so many of the American people were opposed to drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge that Bush didn't even want to introduce that this time, well, now we better reconsider. To hell with the caribou and the environment. We need to drill for oil there, and then we can sell it to China, and that will fight terrorism. Right. Another one they're trying to slip through and hoping that as few people will notice this as notice the ugly part of the anti-terrorism bill that most members of Congress didn't even read is the new push to give the president fast-track authority to negotiate trade agreements like the ones that gave us NAFTA, the GATT treaty that created the World Trade Organization. The new one they're trying to ram through is the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas that 70,000 of us, 20,000 more than Seattle even, showed up to protest in Quebec City when they had their meeting about that last spring. What they're trying to give fast-track authority for, to ram through the FTAA, would be provisions in that treaty that any corporation is as strong as any nation and can challenge any nation's laws as barriers to free trade for such things as having your own postal service instead of privatizing it, having your own school system instead of letting corporations run that, too. In other words, every single thing that our taxpayers' money is used for to benefit the community as a whole has to go under FTAA. That's what they're trying to sneak through under fast track, so keep your eyes and ears wide open on that one. Be ready to send some angry letters, emails, and a few polite but firm crank phone calls to your representatives in Washington. Another thing both King George I and King George II and Ashcroft am going on about too is how we have to bring back the good old days of cloak and dagger, cowboy, skullduggery in the intelligence community and loosen the restrictions on the CIA and others getting in bed with what they call unsavory characters. Bring back the good old days when we did things with the mob, we did things with drug dealers, privatize the whole thing, let them do our dirty work for us. In a way, this is already here because so many of those very unsavory characters and Contragate criminals are in high positions in the Bush administration. One of the really unsavory characters to keep an eye on, if you like Oliver North, you'll love John Negroponte, for example. He was widely believed to have run the Contra War back when he was ambassador to Honduras, where 5 or 6 times as many Nicaraguans were killed as died in the World Trade Center bombings. Do we try him as a terrorist? No, we make him ambassador to the United Nations. And on top of that, what caused these problems in the first place but the skullduggery and dirty tricks with unsavory characters? Such as, in the early 1950s, we thought it would be a great idea to overthrow the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh government in Iran and replace him with the Shah, who was so brutal towards his own people that he literally killed off moderate opposition. So when people were so fed up with him they couldn't stand him anymore, all they had left to turn to was not so moderate opposition in the form of Ayatollah Khomeini and Islamic fundamentalists. When that came in, the growth of violent Islamic fundamentalist uprisings mushroomed all over that part of the world. I can't help but wonder how much of this trouble we would have had today if we had left the people of Iran alone in the 1950s and not overthrown their democratically elected government. We also helped finance and train the Mujahideen guerrillas that got the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. After all, the enemy of my enemy is my friends, and let's not ask too many questions about what they're like the rest of the time. Besides, they sure have access to a lot of nice drugs. No regard for the long-term consequences. We didn't finish the job over there. Once the Soviets were out, hey, the chess game is over. To hell with the Afghan people. We don't care if we blew up your country. We're leaving now. See ya. And so these different Mujahideen groups became warlords unto themselves, fought with each other. One element in the Northern Alliance was fighting another over control of Kabul and killed, 50,000 people and leveled a third of the city. Perhaps not everybody in Afghanistan wants the Northern Alliance back. There's no way we're going to win a war on terrorism. And if we do, what is victory? Israel's been fighting a war on terrorism for a long time and don't seem to have won yet. Same with the British government in Northern Ireland. If bombing civilians stopped terrorism, why hasn't it stopped yet? Michael Medved, of all people, a right-wing media critic, had an interesting thing to say in the USA Today, of all places. The American people must pursue prevention and protection, not punishment. And this is the way to get across to other people waving flags out of anguish, which you kind of have to give them space for, that the war itself is wrong. How about a defense instead of an offense this time? Starting with not only ending our dependence on foreign oil, but doing as much as humanly possible to end our dependence on oil altogether. And instead of spending all our money on nuclear devices in space or running amok in somebody else's country with no real positive, tangible results, how about putting that money into safer airports and safer planes instead? Following the example of El Al Airlines in Israel, they haven't had a hijacking since the late 60s? That's because there's a lot of security checks first, granted, little inconvenient, but at least you don't die. And They're willing to put up the money to protect their pilots through not one but two bulletproof doors, reinforce the floors of the plane so even if a bomb does go off, it doesn't necessarily down the whole plane. Meanwhile, we put our heads in the corporate sand of magic of the marketplace once again and privatize the whole thing. Which means we've handed airport security over to people who are far more interested in making money for themselves than protecting our airline passengers. In San Francisco, the people who inspect the bags and check the metal detectors are the lowest paid people in the entire airport. Turnover is estimated to vary between 110 and 150% a year. That is not the way to protect ourselves from terrorism. And why not use some of that money for a high-speed bullet train system in this country so people don't have to fly so much in the first place? Might actually take mass transportation a little more often when it actually works. They're worried now that the next targets may be our nuclear power plants. They won't be if we decommission them and shut them down. And as unreasonable as Osama bin Laden and people like that are, two of his three key demands are not unreasonable. One of them is to end the sanctions against Iraq. Why not? The death toll over there is estimated to be, well, let's put it this way, 5,000 dead at the World Trade Center versus 1.5 to 2 million people in Iraq. Children dying from malnutrition and no access to medicine that can cure things as simple as diarrhea that can kill you otherwise if it's not treated. Another demand is to pull our troops out of Saudi Arabia. Why not? If that'll go that far to protect us against terrorism, it seems like a simple request. For that matter, we could start going over to the former Soviet republics who have no money but all these leftover weapons. We could go over there, give them the money for the guns, and destroy those weapons on sight before they spread any further. Maybe we could do that for the whole world. I mean, look what we've done to Africa by staying in this horse race to see who can sell the most guns to the most dictators, then sell them to the opposition and sell more to each side when they shoot each other. And it's not too late for a Marshall Plan to truly repair and rebuild the former Soviet Union. We didn't do it in Germany after World War I, and things got so desperate that Hitler was democratically elected to power. After World War II, we learned. Why no Marshall Plan for the former Soviet Empire? And then, to quote the filmmaker Michael Moore, will we ever get to the point that we realize we will be more secure when the rest of the world isn't living in poverty so we can have nice running shoes? Back-breaking poverty is a prime recruiting ground for radical movements for change, and violent, strong-armed put-downs of movement for change creates the desperation and rage that creates terrorists. I agree that we have a legitimate right to defend ourselves, especially against an enemy that will not negotiate because the only thing that'll work for them is if we're all dead. But let's not let the fight against globalization, for the environment, equality, rights of people and species, the fight against the death penalty, against the drug war, that should not be allowed to be a casualty to the war on terrorism. So don't believe the hype. We are patriotic citizens too. Patriotism means love of country, caring about its people, its ecosystem, and others around us, not giving blind loyalty and a blank check to George W. Bush. We are patriotic enough to care about the long-term effects instead of just the short-term gain. Therefore, it is our patriotic duty to guard our country and our Constitution against people and forces hiding behind the flag and God bless America uber alles, using the war on terrorism to terrorize us. Bullying the first neighbor who takes their flag down, that ain't patriotism. Censoring Bill Maher of Politically Incorrect and Bush's press secretary Ari Fleischer coming out and saying people have to watch what they say and watch what they do. That's not patriotism. Clear Channel Communications banning over 150 songs. That's not patriotism. And speaking of terrorism, conspicuously absent from Ashcroft and Bush's lists of terrorist organizations are the fundamentalist Christian Army of God, who have sent over 120 envelopes of white powder to abortion clinics and family planning centers in this country. Fighting globalization is fighting terrorism because it's the corporations who are creating the inequality that's starting terrorism in the first place, but its victims are taking it out on us, not the corporations. And now let me show you why SUVs are a threat to national security. It's not only our growing, increasingly swine-like dependence on foreign oil we're talking about here, but isn't global warming a pretty important national security issue? We can't protect ourselves from Osama bin Laden if the ozone is made out of Swiss cheese and we're all dying of skin cancer. Now can we? So our goal as people who truly do care about this country should be to shorten the war. This worked very well with the Gulf War. Protests got so huge, so quick all over the world that General Schwarzkopf didn't get his wish to go beyond the Kuwait-Iraq border and do a General Sherman job on Basra and Baghdad. It was the pressure of the protests, including protests in other countries that our allies couldn't ignore, that accomplished this. Even now, support is getting shakier in Britain. Tony Blair said over there he would not support an invasion of Iraq. And next to Bush, he's the most gung-ho world leader, thinking he's Churchill right when Bush thinks he's John Wayne. But even he knows when to stop. And that's because of public pressure. And Gerhard Schroeder in Germany, who has announced now they have to reassess the whole approach to the war on terrorism as of this week, earlier said Germany is willing to accept risks, also in military terms, but not adventures. And Bush and his cowboys clearly want an adventure, but if others won't support us, they're not going to get their wish. So by all means, if you know people by email or other communications networks overseas, encourage them to keep the pressure going over there. And the way to get through to people over here that the war on terrorism is something we really need to reconsider and stop is that it's pure and simple bad military strategy. We don't want to create thousands more bin Ladens and make our country less and less safe by running amok over there and getting in bed with the Northern Alliance like we are now. The way to stop the bin Ladens, we have to have the courage to wage peace, too. So in spite of all the bullying going on right now against anybody who opposes the whole Bush corporate agenda for any reason, they already know who we are. Don't get quieter, get louder and louder and louder. Don't hate the media, become the media. One time it was very, very unpopular to oppose the war in Vietnam. People had just gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis. They were scared to death of communist aggression for good reason. But even so, with the whole military-industrial complex and both the Democratic and Republican Party, most of them anyway, aiming at the American people with both barrels, we, the American people, stood up and stopped the Vietnam War. We can do it against the war on terrorism, and we can do it to turn the tide of corporate feudalism and corporate power. showing Bush and crew that now is not the time to play cowboy. Don't give up. Thanks.